Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as you do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts and everything else they're involved in. My guest today is a writer, a fighter, a martial artist based in Tokyo, Japan. He was a contributing editor for Black Belt magazine for 17 years, where he wrote the popular monthly column, Way of the Warrior. He's also written for FightSport magazine, Karate Kung Fu Illustrated, Sport World Japan, MaxFighting.com, and MMAJapan.net. He's also the author of The Soul of Fighting, Martial Arts, Combat Sports, and the Search for Warrior Wisdom, and also Philosophy of Fighting, Morals and Motivations of the Modern Warrior. These books are collections of his best columns spanning nearly 2 decades of writing for Black Belt. The books explore how morality, mysticism, aesthetics, science, and human nature cross paths in the fighting arts. Since moving to Tokyo in 2000, he's devoted himself to mixed martial arts, trained for 10 years at the world-renowned Takada Dojo, where he was the first non-Japanese to earn a shodan. He is currently writing a new book and working on more after that. Please welcome my guest today, Mr. Keith Vargo. How are you doing today, Keith?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing good. I truly appreciate your time, and I know you're my second guest in the last month or so from Japan, and I know that the time difference is crazy, and I'm glad we're able to work it out. It's Friday night for me, Saturday morning for you, so I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Well, I know you've listened to some episodes and you kind of know what we do, but I want to go back to the very beginning. I want to know where that first spark came from, that first interest in martial arts kind of came from, and how that kicked off your martial arts journey.
Okay, this is interesting because I really had no particular interest in martial arts or fighting sports at first, even though my father was an amateur boxer and my grandfather, the stories are kind of vague, but apparently he did some boxing and actually coached a little, but
Cool.
It was all local stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I had no interest whatsoever. And, outside of, you're a kid playing around, pretending like Star Wars kind of stuff, just pretending like you're sword fighting with sticks or something, right? But then I remember just this odd moment of just utter sincerity from one of my friends when we were just hanging out and watching TV, and I don't know, maybe there was some kung fu movie on or something, and he just turns to me, he goes, what I'd really like to do is study a martial art. And then he said that, I was like, hey, maybe I would too. It was that random and out of the blue.
Wow.
And the thing was that he really wanted to study, and his parents were pretty religious, and they saw martial arts as a sort of a neo-pagan Asian kind of thing, and so he wasn't allowed to practice them, right? And that's why he had this deep desire for it, and I felt like his passion for it kind of infected me a little bit, and then I could sort of take off my own because I didn't have the same restrictions that he did. My family wasn't as religious as his, and and so I looked into stuff around town, and there was a YMCA that was maybe 4 blocks from my family home, and they had the cheapest programs around. Yep. And there was a judo class there.
Okay. And
this was June of 1984, and I went and I checked it out, and it was $30 a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cheap even back then.
Yeah, it was.
Wow.
But apparently that's what it came down to, was just, this once a week, everybody contributes enough to pay this minuscule rent for the auxiliary gym that was on the 3rd floor. That was this tiny mat room. Mm-hmm. And the teacher was a state champion, and she was female. Her name was Jordy Hamilton. Okay. And to this day, I feel fortunate in a way I didn't understand at the time to have had her as my first instructor, because she was just a wonderful, gentle woman and an outstanding athlete, and like a state champion. How often do you get someone who's really that good at their art as your first instructor?
Right.
But so that's where it started.
How old were you in June of 84?
Oh, I was 14 years old.
Okay, a couple years old. Because I also started June of '84. I was 10. But yeah, and my first was Tong Sudo.
Oh, there you go. There you go. And actually, I heard you mention on some of the other podcasts about your initial spark was the Karate Kid movies, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And that was all kind of rolled together at the time, was, my friend sort of like infecting me with his interest in it, finding that class nearby and that movie coming out at the same time, because, I didn't care for the Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris movies. Like they just weren't, they were like the previous generation, like my older cousins.
Yeah.
They loved those kind of movies. But, Bruce Lee wasn't that thing for me. It was the Karate Kid movies.
Okay.
And especially that first one, which even to this day, I still consider like the best martial arts movie ever made.
Me too. I still watch it at least once a year. So, and the thing is,
there you go.
I loved Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris, but my whole thing was watching their movies. I never thought it was something I could do. But when I saw Karate Kid, it's like, maybe I can do this. So that was kind of I still loved Bruce and Chuck even back then, but it seemed unattainable to me watching their movies, and the Karate Kid made it more real to me.
And I completely agree. And the more you explore that theme and the details of the differences between those types of movies, you see that. That Daniel LaRusso character is a teenager, like most of us were back then. And, most of the people who were attracted to the martial arts were people who had the same kind of problems that he did, the same kind of anxieties or fears or the bullying that went on. And there was a general pathos in the movie that, when you watch the Bruce Lee movies or Chuck Norris, they're just superheroes, basically. But, even the instructor, when you have that just brilliant, heartbreaking scene of Pat Morita drunk on the anniversary of his wife and son's death.
Yep.
Yeah. That's something you just never see in other martial arts movies.
Yeah.
And it's just so well done. And that movie is, even to this day, it just, the sequels, they're okay.
Yeah.
But that first movie was special.
I agree completely. Huge fan of Chuck, huge fan of, but what's funny is when people talk about like favorite Chuck Norris movie, I always come back to, for me, it was Sidekicks. And that was one that was more like Karate Kid, kind of, the kid getting bullied and the other instructor, obviously his hero was Chuck Norris and stuff, but that's why I think that's my favorite one. So most other people, I love Delta. I have the original cardboard 6-foot poster of Delta Force that was in the lobby of my hometown movie theater. I still have that in my parents' garage. So loved Delta Force, loved Invasion USA, but Sidekicks I think will always be my favorite Chuck Norris movie because of that. So.
And I'll say the things those to me, the martial arts movies and media in general that sticks with me is the ones that have that kind of humanity that's more relatable,
right? That's
less superheroes and more of like a mix of martial arts and character study somewhere in there.
Nice.
But I was gonna say, just in keeping with our generation, I'm not saying I'm above the other stuff. That
right.
Like one of my guilty pleasures is, every few years I go back and watch Jim Kata.
Oh.
All
right, so this interview is done now. I honestly think that's one of the only martial arts movies I've only watched once. Bad.
I have to tell you, it is absolutely awful in a Mystery Science Theater 2000 kind of way.
Yeah.
And it's a guilty pleasure that I watch it and I enjoy it because it's so ridiculous, and so awful. But it was like it came out around the same time, right?
Yeah.
And so it's got that nostalgia feel for me. It has some nostalgia feel to it for me.
Yeah.
And
I'll watch some bad movies, but I don't know if I'll ever watch Jim. I've never been that guilty. I'm sorry for guilty, but I'll watch American Ninja 10 times before I'll watch Jim Kata. I'll watch No Retreat, No Surrender, and that's another one I put up there at Jim Kata. I'd rather watch that one than Jim Kata. It's like, wow.
Yeah, look, I wasn't lying when I said guilty.
Oh yeah,
guilty pleasure.
Wow.
I genuinely feel bad for liking it and enjoying it as much. I can't say I like it for the way they intended.
Yeah,
but I enjoy it in a way that's just wrong.
Wow.
Just so bad and it's so funny.
I think you're definitely the first guest that's actually purposely brought up that movie.
I gotta balance it out.
I brought it up before, for the reason that it's bad, but wow, that's just funny.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of the perfect counterbalance to how great the Karate Kid was, which is why I mentioned
Yeah.
it,
I would say so. I would definitely. So the '80s was a great decade for martial arts movies. I mean, there was
For
definitely
sure.
probably some of the best ones ever came out of that decade. So it's good.
For sure.
Now, how long did you stay at that judo school?
Oh, let's see. I probably stayed there for 2 or 3 years.
Oh, wow.
And while that was going on, I also discovered another eclectic karate school that was in town, and so I was kind of doing this. You know what I mean by eclectic karate is there's some guys that have studied a couple different styles, and they kind of put together their own thing and create their own style, and that's kind of what this guy did. And
okay.
So it was like really, standard traditional judo, and I went and did tournaments with that school. And then the other one, it was not like a fighting school. It was this guy's art, and yeah, so I was doing those kind of concurrently up until I went to university. And yeah, so that was from 84 until, was it 92, something like that.
Wow. So you mentioned competition. So what now, did you do other sports as a kid? And if not, what led to the competition aspect for you? Because like me, I've done one tournament in my life. I've just never been a fan of the competition for myself. So kind of what led you to that?
Well, see, that's funny, is it was just part of judo. Like when you, back in the mid 80s, you joined, you were part of like any judo club. They were part of one of the national organizations, and ours was USJA. And yeah, you'd get a little booklet, and you would have to go to tournaments and record where, when, and how you did, and that kind of stuff. And that record, along with you'd have to do like a physical test and a written test.
Okay.
And the first Japanese I encountered was these long lists of how do you say upper 4/4 hold in Japanese? How do you say scarf hold? And you just, to get your next grade, you had to do that. All those things. And then the thing was that when later when I went to university, it was more like a general kind of competition, sports oriented kind of thing. But around that time, that was 1992, and that probably rings a bell as the beginning of the mixed martial arts movement in the United States.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. December 93, UFC #1.
Yeah.
and for like 2 years before that, everyone saw the ads in black belt, the Gracie Challenge, the Gracie Challenge, the Gracie Challenge.
And it's weird that all that stuff didn't mean a whole lot to me until you actually saw it, right? And then it's like,
Exactly.
wow, that's different. That's special, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and honestly, even though I had done judo competitions, I wasn't really big into it.
Okay.
I mean, it was fun, but it wasn't like a big, motivating force. But after the UFC started, then it was more like, well, there's something to this, like the pressure testing of the things that you've learned. And it had a weird effect of like, not I want to be some giant badass or something, but it felt like there's something true here. Okay. You know what I mean? That like, even if I'm never going to be like some world beater or anything like this, I felt like I want to do this. I really want to know something about these things that I've learned and be able to distinguish for myself, like this works under this circumstance, this is what it really is.
Right.
As opposed to speculating in the gym. So that was the big motivator after the UFC. And I went on to do kickboxing, mixed martial arts, and a lot of grappling too. But
okay.
Yeah, but for those reasons, just because it felt like this is a way to a level of truth that you can't get other ways.
Nice. So then what was next? What was next in the martial arts journey, kind of following along there?
Well, yeah, like when I went to university, like I went to Radford University, and they had a martial arts program there, and I met a lot of people from just different arts, and it was a really sort of like vibrant and just varied mix of people, and learned a lot of things, met a lot of great people, and one of them was a guy who eventually became the editor of Black Belt, Robert Young.
Nice.
And yeah, you should find him and talk to him sometime, because he was one of my big inspirations. Because although most people know him for his work at Black Belt for decades, right?
Yeah.
But what he was doing before that was he was this itinerant travel writer, and he had lived in Korea for a couple of years, and then wrote about Korean martial arts, and then spent a year touring around China. And that was like in the 80s. Late 80s, right? And then he's a month. He was just passing through Thailand, and he just like, yeah, I'm going to stop by and see a Muay Thai school. And he saw it, and he was like, this is brilliant. And he just decided, I'm going to stay here and do Thai boxing for a while, right? And so, like that, this is the guy who was traveling the world doing different martial arts, and then when I went to university, he was there, and although he was doing journalism, he didn't have a journalism degree yet. So he came to school to get the degree to forward his career, and where better to do it at a place with a martial arts program, a university with a martial arts program. So yeah, that's where I met him. And then, I was just this guy who was trying to puzzle some things out for himself. And I had like notebooks full of all this stuff, and then would talk all the time, not just me and him, like just in general, with the group of guys that we had there. It was just this vibrant mix of people. So there was a lot of discussions and arguments, and sometimes some pressure testing of different things. And what came out of that was like me with writing and thinking about all this stuff. And he's like, hey, you should send me some of that. When he eventually became first the editor of Karate Kung Fu Illustrated, if you remember that.
Oh yeah.
And when that and Fighting Stars, I can't remember, but it was like sort of the celebrity smaller mag. Those two were the smaller mags that were sister publications to Black Belt. And then when Karate Kung Fu Illustrated folded, and I'd written a couple of columns for him there, he was like, he got hired at Black Belt, and then he's like, hey, you want to bring that column here with me? And then that's what happened. And it's like, nice. I started writing for Black Belt around the time that I moved to Tokyo as well.
Okay. So, wow. I didn't realize they were that close together. So, okay.
Well, it's about a year or so difference, but for the purposes of the timeline, the details aren't that important. But but slightly before I got to Tokyo, I started writing for Black Belt.
So now, just to back up a little bit, were you interested in writing when you were younger, like as a teenager? Did you enjoy writing classes in high school or anything, or did that just come about as an adult?
It's funny that I always described it as more of a compulsion than anything.
Okay.
That it's just something that I just did. Like whenever I was, my mother claims that I was reading and writing things when I was as young as 2 years old.
Okay.
And I think what she meant was that, I was just deeply interested in books, and I'd try to scribble things, even though who knows how much a 2-year-old can actually write. Right. But like, I can't remember a time when I wasn't, just writing things down or reading. And it's just something that just continued, and, different people have just the things that they do for, I don't know, sometimes maybe as a coping mechanism, sometimes maybe just as a pleasure, maybe a difficult pleasure, and they're just things that you end up doing that define you, right? And I didn't really even think about it until later when Bob was like, hey, you should send me some of that. And I was like, yeah, maybe I should, like almost like my friend with I'd really like to practice a martial art. And then like only someone saying that, it's like, yeah, that's a good idea.
So I'm curious. I've always had an interest, a very, very small interest in writing and stuff. And so like a monthly column, like roughly how much time in a month were you putting into your one column a month?
That's funny because some of them were reworked things like when I first started writing for Karate Kung Fu Illustrated or Black Belt, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to take this real seriously. And, and I did, I took them all seriously, but maybe the over seriousness of a young man who thinks he's got more together than he really does. And, I wrote some of these things that were sort of like the things that you would say only to yourself. And they were maybe a little over the top, but Bob was like, hey, controversy. Great. Yeah. So,
Nice.
And so they were things basically taken from journals and cleaned up a little bit and shaped so that it was better as a column. Right. And those things took like almost no time.
Okay.
But then when you start to really think about what you sound like and what you're trying to say and really trying to communicate something you think is important, then gradually it gets harder, there was times where I thought, like, oh, this column will be, I'll toss this off in, like a couple of days. And the columns were generally maybe a page and a half, 2 pages. Right.
Yeah.
But there are some of those where I'm like, this is terrible. Throw it out. Write it again. Terrible. Throw it out. Write it again. And some of them would be like just 2 days, get it done. Right. And some of them would be like, I'm like right up against a deadline. Bob's like, dude, I need that column, and it's like taking me 3 weeks to get that thing in there, wow. Just because it's hard, sometimes when you're really trying to be honest and clear, and the hardest part is trying to be correct. Like don't make stupid mistakes,
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I get that. I mean, so I mean, completely different part of my life, but I actually write online reviews for local theater productions. All my kids are involved in theater, and I've always done that. I've never really considered myself a a writer or not, but yeah, I definitely makes sense. I know there's some reviews where I'll sit there and I'm like, I know what I want to say. And like 3 hours later, I mean, most of my reviews are like a few paragraphs, not even a page. And there's times where I'm like, okay, what am I trying to say here? So yeah, I definitely get that.
Yeah. And that's when you're writing a column that's not reportage, you're not reporting on something,
right?
It's a think piece. It's developing an idea and an opinion, which a lot of those columns were. It's like, it's just your thoughts out there, and they have to make sense, and they, any facts that you say, they have to be accurate. And it's like, because a lot of the writing I did was that, but then concurrently with the columns that I was writing, also that was the beginning of the Kaktogi boom in Japan, the rise of big mixed martial arts and kickboxing shows in Japan. Mm-hmm. And at that time, they weren't airing in the United States. There wasn't a big pay-per-view of K1 shows or Pride shows at the beginning. And the only way people would find out about it was either some kind of illegal downloading somewhere or through the martial arts magazines. And so concurrently with, the columns, like sometimes a 2-page column would take me way too long to do. There was a lot of fight reporting where you go to the show, you watch the fights, you write about the fights, you send it in. Right. Yeah. So those two things were going at the same time. And I remember like there were times where it was remarkable. Like I just wrote this 3 or 4 page thing on the fight event, the Pride 16 or whatever that I went to. And that was like easy because it's just facts, just what you saw, just what happened. Right. But then you write this 2-page thing that's developing an idea that maybe someone hasn't thought about in a certain point of view. And that's rough, it takes a lot longer,
That makes sense. And I can say I never watched Pride illegally. Never. I don't know who would do such a thing.
Like these anonymous people on the net that keep confessing somewhere. Yeah,
that's right. Exactly. So then you said in my intro, I said you wrote for Black Belt for 17 years. At what point did you decide, hey, I'm going to, do a book? Where did that idea come from, and how long did you work on that first one?
Well, see, that's the funny part is that that wasn't my idea. That was Black Belt, because they have the rights to your columns and they can just pull them together. And I mean, all of those things that you would see in Black Belt, they would have the rights. That was like part of, whenever you would write a work for hire contract with them, or at least the ones that I've seen, that they would have the right to reuse it in other ways.
Okay.
And so if you go back and you look at the Black Belt books catalog from like the 2000s, the early aughts and so on, you'll see a lot of compilation books of like, Black Belt magazine striking or Black Belt magazine grappling. And you'll see like a series, like you'll see like a sort of retooled article about kicking from Bass Rutten or something like that. And, like you have a whole series of like just striking stories that were pulled together into one book, a compilation.
Okay.
And my first book was one of their compilations.
Okay.
They just took the first 10 years of my writing and pulled it together in the book. And they didn't have to ask me for help with it or anything like that. They could just do what they wanted with it. But the editor at the time, Sarah Jida, like Dzida, I'm probably slaughtering her name, but she was just a wonderful editor. And I asked her, can I write an intro to this? Can I suggest maybe this or that? And there wasn't a whole lot of time because they would pull together the compilation books in a pretty fast and efficient way. But she allowed me to suggest some things. And one thing I wasn't allowed to rewrite, but I said, can we change the title? Because the guy who edited this, it wasn't her, had completely missed the point and got things entirely wrong. And I was like, we got to change that title and like the use of a few words in here. The title was it had 2 philosophical terms, monists and pluralists, like talking about whether the whole world is one thing or the whole world is multiple things, right? And I err on the side of pluralists, that there's many compartmental truths and situational truths when it comes to martial arts, right? And the guy he changed the words from monist and pluralist to other things, and the whole column made no sense because of it.
Nice. Okay.
But yeah, so yeah, she pulled together the book and I got to write a nice intro to it. And yeah, and honestly, she did a great job of editing and then asked me a few other questions, but mostly that was her work of editing and putting together that. And yeah, she did a great job.
Okay. And when did that first book come out?
2008, like December of 2008.
Okay.
I remember right. Yeah.
Cool.
Just in time for Christmas.
Nice. There you go. And then what about the second one? How much longer was that? How much later did that come out?
That actually came about after I finished with black belt, when because what happened, and there's something that's happened with media a lot over the past 20 years as it's become kind of more and more consolidated, that black belt got bought and sold a few times.
Yes.
And I survived I think 2 or 3 changes in ownership over those 17 years. And then the final one, they were like, yeah, no, thank you very much. We're moving on and changing some formats. And so when that happened around 2016, I think that, then I had another 7 years worth of columns. And when I mentioned man, I wish I could put them together and self-publish. And they were basically like, well, one of the editors is like, yeah, you can do that. They have the rights to do it too, but they weren't interested. So I just self-published those. Yeah. And I actually got in writing. I'm like, you're sure I can do this? And he's like, yes. He sent me an official letter that says, yes, you can do this. And I still have that letter just in case somebody houses me later. But yeah, the second book is the other 7 years. And I self-published, just Kindle Direct publishing on Amazon, like a lot of guys do these days. Yeah.
Cool. And you mentioned that you're working on your third book. Now, what now? If you're not writing articles anymore, what's this one going to be about?
Well, see, that's the third book is the other articles, because remember I mentioned there was the columns that I wrote.
Yes.
So the 2 books that are out now are the columns.
Okay.
Just the monthly column. But concurrently with that, I was writing all these fight reports and doing interviews with fighters and writing profiles of these guys. And there's a whole lot of that. Sometimes there's a lot of these little news shorts, that would get, just like, do you remember Black Belt Times?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So that was just that section at the beginning before the feature stories would start.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that have this guy has been cast in this role in this new movie. And it would be like 2 paragraphs or something. Right?
Yep. I remember that. Yep.
Yeah. And they would also have fight things like that too. So this is a little side, but I had lived in Finland for a couple of years when I was younger.
Oh, cool.
And so I was kind of tuned into what was going on there. And I don't know if you remember, there was a guy that fought in one of the first few UFCs, maybe 4th or 5th one, something, but he was Tony Halme.
I remember the name. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he was a pro wrestler and a mixed martial arts guy. He was like one of the first guys that Randy Couture just totally wiped out.
Okay.
But he was kind of famous because of his pro wrestling status. Right. And, and so there was these weird things where I'd just, write to Bob and say, hey, did you hear about Tony Halme? He got, elected to Parliament in Finland. I was tuned into that kind of stuff. And so Bob's like, well, write it up and send it in. And then, so I write these 2 paragraphs on Tony Halme being like the newly minted minister or, representative for one area of Finland. Right.
Nice.
And so there's all this collection of all these things of these bout reviews or event reviews and profiles of fighters, interviews, and a bunch of these little shorts, the third book is putting all that together.
Okay.
And that's taken quite a while, actually.
Do you have a hopeful date you want to have it released by, or?
I want to finish it this year because here's the thing is that I keep adding to it. And you think well, there's only so many things you wrote, right? But I don't know how you are about with all your podcasts and things you do. Maybe you're better at archiving than I was. But the way I was is I would write something, send it off to black belt, and then move on to the next thing. And I didn't always save things in convenient ways or in orderly ways, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this thing where, I think I'm finished with the book. I've got finished with this section. And then just in random conversation at the gym, my current coach, we were talking about controversial things that happened at Pride. He's like, hey, you remember that time that Renzo Gracie spit on Shungo Oyama and, that kind of thing, and during a fight because they had some bad blood between them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yeah, I do remember that, and realized I wrote about that and it's not in the book. I gotta go find that,
Wow.
And so it's just constantly getting reminded of all these things that I had written and totally forgot about. And so because of my poor archiving, I keep rediscovering all these little small pieces or forgotten stories that I really want to include them because they're fascinating. The one I just mentioned, you'd want to read about that, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an interesting, not necessarily a nice story, but it's fascinating, right?
Definitely.
But yeah, exactly. So this collection of all these things that happened during this really special time in the fight history, martial arts or fighting sports history, martial arts and fighting sports history, that was the Kaktogi boom. Kaktogi is the word that Japanese people use to describe fighting in general, like sport fighting, Kaktogi. And the Kaktogi boom, and they actually say in katakana boom, just like an oil boom or a coal boom in the United States, like in that kind of stuff, the gold rush, that kind of thing. That's really what it was like here, is this huge intersection of talent and money and media. And, like K1 was like selling out Tokyo Dome every year at Christmas, and just 50,000 people. It was amazing, right? And so like all these reports are from back in those times. And so I don't want to leave things out. And so the book just keeps swelling, and, but I
can have a 1,000-page book when you're done.
Honestly, right now, without adding any photos yet, it's about 300 pages.
Wow.
Yeah. And I still have I got to add photos. I'm like, that's going to be 400, man. I got to stop writing this thing. I got to stop including things, right? But it's hard not to. So yeah, I got to make some decisions. Cool. But I hope to get it out this week, or no,
this week. All right, cool.
Sorry, this year. Sorry. Yeah.
I won't hold you to this week, but this year maybe.
Yeah, please no. You'll be very disappointed.
By the time this episode airs, the book, no. I would not do that. Talk a little bit about the Takada Dojo and what kind of led you there and what that experience was like.
Well, that was when I first came to Japan. I wasn't living in Tokyo. I was living up north in Hokkaido, and that was just as Pride was starting. I was living and working there, and I was just watching the shows like anybody else. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you remember the early days of Pride. That Takada himself was the star. He was like celebrity pro wrestler, like as big in Japan as like Hulk Hogan or someone like that would be in the United States. Mm-hmm. And then he's going and really fighting. Just imagine if Hulk Hogan said, I'm going to go and really fight. Sells out arenas, right? But he wasn't the guy who was the winningest fighter. It was one of the other guys on his roster, Kazushi Sakuraba.
Yep.
Right? And watching Sakuraba win the first UFC Japan, and then watching him fight in the first few Prides that he was in, and it was just like, oh, this guy's electric. I got to go, and wherever he's training, I'm going to go there. And that's when I hit Tokyo. That was the first gym I went to, and that was also a pretty vibrant scene there, because it was this whole mix of all kinds of people that were, they were part of that scene. Like that there was a lot of like money and talent and everything just all tossed together. And so all these guys are fighters. They're prize fighters. So they want to win that prize. They want to get paid. They want to be champions. And, there's a bunch of those guys coming through and training all the time at Takada Dojo, in addition to the regular instructors. And then there was the young guys who were nobodies yet, who were really ambitious, and they want to fight and move on and be something. And it was a good place to be. And because of all those things intersecting at the same time.
Wow. And it said you trained there for 10 years.
Yeah, I did. And
that's cool.
And I did my share of mixed martial arts too, but nothing like some of those guys. They'd fight anytime they could, right? And I was in my 30s by the time I hit Takada Dojo. So
wow. Okay.
I wasn't going to be doing that, but I did do some mixed martial arts. I did shoot boxing as well, like amateur shoot boxing. Do you know what that is?
Oh yeah. I've actually interviewed one or two people that have done shoot boxing before. So
there you go. And I know a lot of people say, it's kickboxing with throws, but in Japan they also have standing submission locks too. And so it's this weird other thing that's almost full MMA, but not quite. They call it standing vale tudo.
Yeah.
And so that was really interesting. So like I did that on an amateur level, and I did mixed martial arts, and I've actually finished off like the last fight that I did was at any decent level as I fought at Korakuen Hall, which is kind of the venue for big fights here. Mm-hmm. But I was on a 2-rounder on an undercard, just in a boxing match. Yeah, that was great fun.
That's kind of cool though. I mean, that's one thing I've trained other people for fights. I've never had the interest myself to step in the ring or step in the cage. It's just like I said, never been the competition guy. I mean, what's weird though, as a kid, I played basketball, and I played competitive paintball for 7 years. I traveled around the Midwest playing paintball, but just for martial arts, that's never what it was about for me. So
and to tell you the truth, I completely understand that, because initially I was not interested in it at all either. And the thing I try to persuade people with is that this is about truth and knowledge and understanding. Mm-hmm. It's not about, it can be a little dangerous, but depending on what level of competition you want to do, it doesn't have to be. Like you can do just pure grappling and it'll still teach you something
Right.
that you wouldn't have known otherwise, right?
Yep.
And nobody's going to be, like breaking your nose and, giving you a concussion,
True.
But the thing is still that struggle and that the difficulty of trying to overcome someone that's fighting against you. Just there's a level of, in spite of the fact you might not like the competition, that it will still teach you something and it's still valuable. And
right.
so I recommend everybody to do, a little bit of each, like you do a little striking competition or a little bit of grappling just once, just to see what it feels like, to see what you learn from it,
No, like I said, I did my one. So
yeah, see, there you go.
That was good for me. So I got to ask with yourself, you pretty close to the same age as me. You grew up, you saw the UFC when it started. You actually did some MMA yourself. So as a fan, do you prefer the old school MMA from like the 90s, or do you prefer what it's become now? Just as a fan.
See, that's hard, because I really liked that sort of time where nobody really knew what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like we were all part of this journey of discovery, right?
Yeah.
Both the people in that ring and you as fans watching, right? Probably when you watched UFC 1, whether it was live or not, the first time you saw Tali Tula, the sumo wrestler, get a tooth kicked out of his head in like 30 seconds into the first round, you're like, whoa. None of us saw that coming, right?
Yeah.
And that was it's part of this overall thing of discovery. So I miss that, and I really liked that, as opposed to now everybody kind of knows what's going on and there's unified rules. But back then it was like Wild West.
Yeah.
You'd have like 5 different events with 5 different rule sets, right?
Yeah.
You never quite knew what was going to happen. And Pride was the last of those kind of shows to me.
Yeah.
That there were times when I was watching Pride and I was enjoying it, but I was almost like, is this legal? Is this okay? Because it was really edgy.
Yeah.
You probably remember wrestler Kevin Randleman.
Oh yeah.
Trying to directly spike Emelianenko Fyodor's head right into the mat.
Oh yeah, I remember that fight.
Right. I remember watching that, and there's people now who have sort of come up since Pride, and they're used to unified rules where that's so wildly illegal you wouldn't even consider it.
Yeah. And
I show them that fight, and they're just like flabbergasted that that's real. Yeah, that's not fake. That really happened.
Yep.
And even at the time, I think we all kind of felt like that. This is really on the edge, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely changed. We've definitely lived through the changes of it for sure.
Yeah, and actually, that's one of the things I try to capture in the book, is that the next book that's coming out is the Kaktogi boom is a very particular time, where we were all sort of in that moment of discovery, and I hope the book conveys that. But yeah, like I prefer that on a fan level, but also now on the athlete's level, I like that it's a known commodity and the risks aren't as bad as they used to be.
Yeah.
That I do like. But as a fan,
I know.
I like the discovery phase.
I missed those first like 5, 6, 7 events. But yet also I judged MMA for years. I judged, probably a thousand fights, mostly, local stuff. I mean, I've judged a few big names. I mean that, maybe weren't big when I judged them and became big and made it to the UFC and stuff like that. But I saw some bad things, when I was judging. I saw one guy almost die in the cage. That's one of the last ones I judged. And that was hard to watch. And
what happened in the fight? Like how did he get injured?
He was in a submission, and I'm trying to remember exactly what happened, because it was like 4 feet from my face when it happened. But the ref stopped it as quick as he could. But the thing is, you couldn't, the way the fighters were, you couldn't see the guy's face. You really couldn't. There's no way the ref could have got in there to see it, because he was like facing the fence. He was, so you couldn't really face in the cage. You couldn't really see it, and the ref didn't really stop it in time. But it's also not the ref's fault. The ref wouldn't have stopped him when he did. The guy would have died. The ref saved his life. The guy never fought again. It was hard to watch. I mean, he ended up in the hospital, and it was. And I've also seen, I judged before the commission. I judged where they'd be like, all right, one of our fighters dropped out. Anybody want to come fight for free beer? It's like, wow.
Yeah, that happened back in the day.
All the time.
Walk out the audience.
Yep. I mean, we did one fight where the promoter thought it would be a bright idea to get in. She thought this would bring in more people during one of the intermissions to do like a pro wrestling like WWE type wrestling. I'm like, so you have people who are coming here to watch real fighting, real brutalness, and you're going to, and the wrestlers got booed out of this was before the commission, so they were still doing it in a boxing ring, and they literally got booed out. They were in there for like less than 3 minutes. And she's like, that didn't go well. I'm like, yeah, I told you it wasn't going to go well.
Yeah, just totally different crowds, man. Or actually it's the same crowd, but just different days, right? They're not there for that day.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, one of the funniest ones I saw, it was an amateur fight. Cause like I judged in North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota. North Dakota never had amateurs when I was judging, but Minnesota did. So I judged a lot more amateur in Minnesota. And I was thinking, if you were a fan of like the WEC and UFC in the early, you remember Brock Larson?
Oh yeah.
Yep. Brock's a good friend. He was one of my first interviews in the show and stuff. And he also is a promoter. And this was one of his fights he was promoting. And these two guys making their their amateur debut, both 0-0, and they come out and this one guy just explodes. I mean, he's throwing everything and just beating the crap out of this guy for like 30 seconds. The other guy didn't even get a punch off. And I'm like, oh man, they're going to stop this thing. And the other guy somehow got him in there and flipped him, got on top of him. And I can see it in slow motion, but it happened in like half a second. As soon as he cocked his hand back to punch the guy tapped. And you can hear his coach being like, what the hell? and even the ref was like, he was stunned for a sec before he got in there and broke him up. And it's like, and I heard the guy talk. He's like, yeah, no, I'm done. I don't want to get hit. And his coach, I remember his coach, he's like, you couldn't have thought of that before you stepped into the cage. Like, wow. So but good times.
I mean, credit to him that he knew when he was done.
Yeah. As soon as he wasn't winning, he was done.
Yeah.
So I saw some interesting things like that and amazing fights. I remember women MMA before it was big. We'd always have our local promoters that tried to get a female fight on the card, and that was always one of the most popular fights and usually some of the most entertaining.
You probably remember back in the day, there was in Japan there was Smack Girls, right?
Yep.
And so there was all female events here, like as early as I think maybe 2000, 2001.
Wow.
And you want to talk about illegally streaming things, like, all those folks who couldn't get any female fights, in the States at that time. Yeah. They were downloading all these, like events from Japan because that was it. That was the only all female cards there were. Right.
That's cool.
Yeah. But I'll tell you what, like, you just reminded me of one story. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with a guy who calls pancrase fights, but he's a Scottish guy, Stuart Fulton. And a long time ago, he was an uchideshi, like the kind of live-in apprentice fighters at Takada Dojo.
Okay.
And like that's how I met him. But later on, he'd left Takada Dojo and he was at other gyms, his training, and he was fighting, right? And we would second each other in fights, be cornermen and stuff like that. And because I'd fought in this one smaller show called Kingdom Ergites, and that's a long story by itself, but it's a small organization. It's like an offshoot of pro wrestling from the 90s, and it had these multiple rule sets, right? And they would have like the Kingdom rules and the Ergites rules, and the Kingdom rules were these like pro wrestling rules with rope escapes, but it was real fighting. And then there was these Ergites rules, which was basically like the Ergites is German for ambition. Okay. And those rules were the no hold bars kind of rules, right? And UFC rules, right? Now, when he signed up to fight for them, they asked him, well, what rule set do you want? He was like, oh, UFC rules. And Stuart meant the unified rules that we have now. And so that's what he trained under. And we show up there, and I'm the second on fight day. And then there's the guy who runs the Kingdom Ergites organization. And he's like, okay, everybody, at the meeting before the fighters meeting before the event, he's talking about, the different things and, the gloves and everything like that. And he said, and we had a special request for original UFC rules from Stuart. And we were like, huh? And when he said UFC rules, Stuart meant the unified rules that we know now. Wow. But what Irie heard was UFC 1 rules. And we found out that the day of the event, and we were like, huh? What? Wow. And Stuart had to go in there and fight with, like full elbows and punches anywhere you want kind of thing, like UFC 1 rules. And he won. He won by getting on the guy's back and elbowing him in the base of the skull, basically. I think so. No, maybe the guy ended up turning over onto his back after he got hit once in the back of the head, and then he got the elbows in the face, and then that was it, like he was done, but yeah, it was one of the most bizarre things of like being there, like right, maybe a half an hour before, no, a couple, maybe an hour and a half before the fights, at that meeting, suddenly realizing you're back in UFC 1,
Wow. That's crazy. So speaking of like crazy stuff like that, so in all your years, what's the worst martial arts related injury?
I've had a lot of smaller injuries, I've had the injuries like that were in training, right?
Okay.
Like separated shoulder or stuff like that.
Yeah.
But believe it or not, the worst thing that ever happened was not an injury; it was an infection.
Oh.
And you may have had a staph infection yourself, or maybe you've known people that
never had
one.
Yeah, we had a local martial arts gym had a breakout many years ago. They had to close for like 2 weeks. So
yeah, there you go. And MRSA means methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus, which means the antibiotics don't work. They try another one, they don't work. And so this happened to me where I had a staph infection that was recurring because it was one of the resistant ones. And the thing that happens is that the antibiotics kind of work, and you think, oh, I'm cool, and then it comes back. And this kept happening over the space of like 5 months until like the last one. I was hospitalized for a couple of weeks with an infection in my thigh, one of those ones where, like you ever seen the Kevin Randleman pictures, like when they had to like cut open his side and you can see his rib bones, like through the hole in his side. Yeah. Well, mine wasn't quite to the bone, but yeah, that was the same thing where I had a mass of infection in my thigh. It looked like a big sweet potato under my skin. That's how big it was. And they had to cut that open and drain it. And I had to have like the last ditch kind of antibiotics, and that was the worst thing that ever happened. I was like, that really made me question whether I was ever going to step in a gym again.
Oh, I can see that. Wow, crazy.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what was your if you had one or more than one, but what was your walkout song?
Okay, well, this is a funny one too, because you remember Deep Purple's "Perfect Strangers"?
Oh yeah,
yeah, love that song, right? And it has that great dramatic organ part at the beginning. Before the drums and guitar and everything kicks in, right? I thought that'll be perfect. Organ thing goes, lights fall down, whip open the curtain when the guitars start and walk to the cage, right?
Yep.
I love that, right? And I did use it. And I had this idea of like, oh, that'll be my ring name. I'll be the perfect stranger because, Gaikokujin in Japanese is like outsider, stranger, Yeah. And when I said perfect stranger to my wife, who's Japanese, she's like, and I was going to wear purple. And she was just like, no, that's to Japanese ears, that's going to sound like the Purple Ranger. like Power Rangers,
Power
like that kind of thing.
That's awesome.
He's like, yeah. And I had all this plan, and I had bought like purple shorts and everything. She was like, no, don't. Everybody's going to laugh at you and call you the Purple Ranger. And I was like, I remember being crestfallen, but I was like, I'm gonna still use that song, even though I'm not going to call myself the Perfect Stranger now.
Dang. So are you sorry you never tried it once, or with the whole thing?
No, I trust my wife's advice with this stuff. That it's
probably
if she
wise.
says it's not going to be cool from a Japanese point of view, she's probably right.
That is cool. That's hilarious. Actually, the Purple Ranger. I love it. I mean, hey, I've interviewed the Red and Green Ranger. Now I've interviewed the Purple Ranger. Come on.
There you go. There you go. Tell them I said hi.
We'll do that. So in all your years of martial arts, is there one philosophy that stands out at the top of your list?
Oh, man. Well, I've written basically 2 whole books worth of philosophy, so it's hard to pick out just, one thing. But, I'll tell you what, that it's really the idea that martial arts are about fighting, that everything that is worthwhile in martial arts, all of the humility and the respect and, this sort of like questioning of being and this mysticism, every bit of that comes from the actual experience of fighting, whether it's yours or the person who taught you or something like that. That's really the heart of it. And that's why I sort of encourage everybody to at least try competition so on some level, in some way, because, if you're completely harmless, you've never actually fought or had that feeling of confronting someone, then you don't feel in your bones why it's worthwhile to be kind to other people, why it's worthwhile to be patient.
Right.
And it's like, if you really have that feeling, like if this goes wrong, if people start fighting and people get hurt, maybe me, maybe the other person, then you don't really have that in your bones feeling of why humility is important and why patience is important. And so that thing of like all those good things in martial arts coming from the fighting itself, being good at the fighting and really understanding the fighting. That's one basic level philosophy that I have, is start with that. Start with the fighting, and then learn the lessons that it teaches you or forces you to learn.
Right.
Forces you to be humble or forces you to be respectful or all those kind of things. I always say that in the books, is that people see the end result of martial arts. They see the formed martial art. They don't see the guy that started it,
Right.
who oftentimes those guys were not nice guys. They were like wild street fighter kind of, rough, short-tempered characters who like to fight. And then at some point, they have to confront what that means. Right. And that's what eventually made them a martial artist. Nice. And then we get the martial art that comes from that later. But that cauldron of personal pathos and hard-won experience is where it comes from. So you don't have to have the bad life that some of these guys had and to force them to become better people. But I feel like actually doing some of the fighting makes you understand it.
I like it. That's cool. One thing I never asked you, did you ever get involved into the teaching side of martial arts?
I have, but it's like we were talking about before we started the podcast, is, I teach English for a living, and the amount of money you make teaching English compared to the amount of money that you make teaching martial arts, it's different. So I can support my family better with English teaching,
Okay, cool.
But I have done some teaching, and I still do some seminars occasionally, like at the Yokota Air Base. I have a friend who runs a jiu-jitsu club, and I went out there and actually taught a boxing seminar because
cool.
New boxing's kind of new to a lot of them, and that was fun. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know you've listened to a few episodes, so the next part is the fun questions to start wrapping up the show. And this one I'm definitely curious about your martial arts Mount Rushmore. Who are 3, 4, 5 names you'd put up there?
Wow. It's hard because, we think of Mount Rushmore, it's a specific thing. It's presidents, right?
Right.
So if I had to pick, particular fighters, I have people, my Mount Rushmore of martial artists who were fighters is, Kazushi Sakuraba. He was the biggest motivation for me learning martial arts or mixed martial arts. Yeah. And Emelianenko Fyodor, because I thought he is just a generational, just the best of my generation, and there's boxing like James Toney and Chris Bird, and, so fighters, those guys,
okay.
But, when it comes to other things, writers and martial artists who were not competitive, but they were more philosophers and stuff like that. There's a lot of them are lesser known,
right?
Back in the day, you probably remember reading Don Drager's books.
Oh yeah.
Right. And although, there's martial arts scholarship has kind of moved away from, as we've learned more, our understanding of the history of martial arts is not quite the simple distinction of jitsu and do that we learned back in the day from his books. But his books were just seminal, that his books were the reason that a lot of people learned about martial arts and understood them in depth and moved on to.
So many of my guests have mentioned him. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. So, when it comes to books, it's like there's Drager, and I don't know if you remember, there was a Kung Fu guy named Adam Su. Who he used to have a column, I think it was in Black Belt, Sword Polisher's Record.
Okay.
Or maybe it was Inside Kung Fu, but yeah, he was one of those guys that he always had one of the best columns. And yeah, I loved him as a writer. And there's actually Norman Mailer himself as a writer.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen the documentary When We Were Kings? It's a Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, Rumble in the Jungle.
Yeah, that was so awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. And Norman Mailer's writing about fights, about boxing, are really great because he was one of the best novelists of the 20th century. Yeah. But he had a particular love of boxing and a relationship with a lot of these fighters and would actually report on those fights. And when you watch that documentary, When We Were Kings, his voice is the voice of the narrative voice that understands everything that's going on and speaks with a kind of wisdom and authority that nobody else in that movie does. And I remember when I started writing, that model, that voice was what I aspired to. Was I want to write like I heard Norman Mailer talking about fights in When We Were Kings.
That's cool.
But yeah, sorry, I didn't make the whole Mount Rushmore.
That's a dang good list though. I like it. All right. How about a favorite martial arts book? Not your own, obviously.
Well, I am fond of those too, though.
I've only had one guest actually try to pick their own, so I try to be like, not your own.
Well, I'll tell you what, I remember, back in the day there were the Don Drager books.
Yes.
And that's the thing, is his writing style he wasn't a stylish writer.
Yeah.
But he was an honest and a clear writer, and So some folks criticized him for, being kind of dry, but I didn't see that. I thought it was very clear and honest writing style. And so I like Draeger's books in general. Very and cool. I think you mentioned the Joel Himes book.
Oh yeah. Zen in the Martial Arts. Yes.
Yeah, that was a good book. But and I like that because it had, and I tried to imitate that writing style a bit too, because, Himes wrote those sort of short, maybe like 3 or 4 pages of a chapter. One chapter will only be a few pages. And you very, with some anecdote that he had, would in a very short space, very clearly get across what he wanted to say, because he was a professional screenwrter, right?
Yep, correct.
And so I like that a lot because of those things. But, it had very little to do with Zen,
Right.
But the book that was sort of inspired by was Zen in the Art of Archery.
Yes.
And that book was the motivation for so much. When you watch like Star Wars and that sort of mystical, martial arts teacher, so much of every version of that Obi-Wan Kenobi in every movie owes so much to that book, Zen in the Art of Archery, which that leads me to the final one I was going to say is a little known book called Shots in the Dark by Shoji Yamada, which actually tells the point of view of Japanese people around Eugen Herrigel, the German guy who wrote Zen in the Art of Archery. Yamada argues that Herrigel misunderstood a lot of what was going on.
Okay.
And he includes things that his teacher, that Herrigel's teacher, Kenzo Awa, said, and his point of view from the famous, shooting a target in the dark is a famous passage from the book, and hitting the target and then splitting the arrow that hit the target first. And that was sort of from Herrigel's side to show this sort of mystical ability. And from Awa's side, it was like, wow, that's cool. Isn't that like a nice coincidence almost? And it's like this complete misunderstanding between the two of them.
I'll have to add that one to my list.
Yeah. And I have to say that it's a great sort of balance of, if you read one and then you read the other, of the great aspirational romantic point of view of martial arts that we grew up with,
right?
And the other side of, these folks who were just living their everyday Japanese lives and being the people that they were, right?
Yeah.
and Kenzo Awa, he had his own particular ideas that were mystical, but they were not Zen and they were not usual. And so there was a lot of misunderstanding going back and forth between them. And those two books they show, for anybody who wants to be honest with himself, they show both, the good aspirations and the willful, almost misunderstanding of Asian martial arts.
Okay.
And the other side of it, of what's really going on, from Yamada's Shots in the Dark book. So I recommend those two together.
Okay, cool. I'll add them to my list for sure. So, all right. And this one, I'm hoping we're about the same age. So hopefully you'll have a good answer for this one. Favorite martial arts video game? Did you ever get into gaming?
Video games?
Yeah.
Sorry, this is one where you might be asking the wrong guy, because I was not much of a gamer.
Okay.
No, I mean, there was times where, my buddies were really into like X-Men and that kind of stuff. I hate to say it, but really the video game, the last time I remember actually really liking video game, it wasn't a video game. It was a CD-ROM, Myst. You remember that?
Oh yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So I love those puzzle game kind of things, not the fighting game. So sorry, man. I'm the wrong guy to ask.
It's all good. So, all right. How about a favorite martial arts TV show?
Oh, yeah. If I want to be honest, I was going to say, like, I came of age in the mid 80s Karate Kid kind of era. And I think you mentioned this in your podcast too, there was that was the ninja boom at the time.
Yes.
And there was Lee Van Cleef's
The Master. Yes. Loved it.
And basically, driving around the United States in a van and solving a crime with ninjutsu from week to week, and at the time, that was great. I loved that when I was 14. But looking back on it now, it doesn't hold up as well.
Yeah, I know.
But concurrently with that, they were playing reruns of the 1970s Kung Fu. And honestly, there's times when I watch that even now where I'm like, that's really well done, and I kind of miss that,
Yeah. I know they're remaking it as a movie. So they're remaking it starring Donnie Yen.
Well, I look forward to it. And
Yeah.
I hope it carries the same impact of that. It was really insightful at times, compared to, Lee Van Cleef was fun with his throwing stars and his hood, but there wasn't a lot of depth there like there was in the Kung Fu TV show.
It did have Sho Kosugi in it though. That was kind of cool.
Yeah, it had its moments, man. I'm
Yeah.
telling you, like I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to pretend like I'm above it. I
Right.
loved watching that when I was a kid.
And anyone who mentions Kung Fu, I got to ask, have you watched the new series Warrior?
No, but that's the one based on Bruce Lee's notes, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, and that's one of those ones that's on my list. I got to go watch that, but I haven't yet. Well,
I just started rewatching it because it just dropped on Netflix, I think in February. So I just started rewatching it.
Well, what's the verdict?
Oh, I like it. It's a great show. I mean, Shannon Lee did a phenomenal job with it. I'm hoping if it's popular enough, Netflix will give it a fourth season, so we can get a proper ending. But all 3 seasons are on Netflix, and it's great.
It's got that many, 3 seasons.
Yep, yeah, 3 seasons. So
wow,
it's fun. I enjoy it.
Okay, well now I got something to add to my list. There you go.
But I'm also, like you said, we talked about Karate Kid. I also love Cobra Kai. I mean, I realize it's cheesy, but the nostalgia, I love it so much.
I'll tell you straight. I haven't seen all the seasons of it, but I watched the first 2 seasons, and especially the first one. Yeah. I was like, "This is so good. This is as good as the first movie with the real life level of pathos and really a martial arts, the struggle people have as martial artists."
Yes. Yep. No,
yeah. So
I'm looking forward to July when the final season starts dropping. So
yeah, definitely. I'm gonna have to get on Netflix again and watch that.
There you go. All right. How about a favorite martial arts movie?
Well, I already mentioned. Like I think Karate Kid is by far the best martial arts movie ever made. The very first one.
I agree. I completely agree.
Yeah. And we already mentioned all that stuff earlier. And,
yeah.
So.
And I actually, I liked the second one. Third one, I still watch it, but and of course the fourth one with Hilary Swank we don't talk about. So
I'll tell you what, like the Cobra Kai thing, like I said, there was some fan service and some cheesy, funny stuff in there, but for the most part, I was pleased by how much they managed to retcon all that stuff really well.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like those guys are super fans as well as really creative showrunners and yeah. They did with what they had with the weirdness of the third and fourth movies. They still managed to retcon it really well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. A lot of people seem to think that Hilary Swank might show up in the final season, and we haven't heard anything about it yet. Some people do like that movie, so it'll be interesting if they. The one thing I'm not thrilled about is that they're combining the original Karate Kid with the remake with Jackie. I love Jackie Chan, but I'm just still not sure what to think about that.
Well,
I hope it's good, but.
What I heard about that was just that it has something to do with Will Smith owning the rights to the Karate Kid.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
So
now we have to wait almost another year because it was supposed to come out in December and they pushed it back because of Cobra Kai, I think. So
yeah,
we'll see.
But yeah, Cobra Kai I should have mentioned that for the TV shows because that's awesome.
Me and my daughter watch it, and I've probably rewatched because every time a new season comes out, I'll rewatch the previous season. So I've rewatched the first season probably 7 times now. And then I'll be probably binging them in June before they start dropping the final season. So,
but I mean, rightfully so, because I've actually watched the first season a couple of times because when it first dropped, I bought it on YouTube Red,
Nice.
But I couldn't not watch it because I mean the trailers just showed exactly what I was hoping for, which was a real well done continuation of the first movie, which we all loved. Right?
Yeah. Only thing is, I wish they could have done it 20 years earlier when Pat Morita was still alive. Because I honestly think he would have loved it. If they could have came up with that similar story and had it take place, that I think it could have been cool.
I agree. Yeah. I agree. And, honestly, now that, as those seasons went on with Cobra Kai, it's like you're looking at Ralph Macchio and William Zabka. Yeah, like they're looking a little too old for karate at this point. You know what I'm saying? Like, or I mean, for competitive karate,
Yeah.
Like, you have getting to street fights and stuff. And I'm like, it would have been, if they were like late 30s, early 40s, that would have fit better, the look of it.
I mean, they're playing 10 years younger than their characters actually are, but even then they're still playing 50-year-olds instead of 60-year-olds.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, I should say that I'm 50. So hey, that's right. We can still do it if we want to.
Well, that's the thing is I still compete into my 50s. Right.
Yeah.
And, but the thing is, like, I really don't expect anybody to watch it.
There you go.
I go to a wrestling tournament. I don't think anybody wants to see me in a singlet. It's like,
there you go.
I understand.
Final question: any movie you've ever seen? Favorite movie fight scene?
Oh, well, it'd have to be the ones from the Karate Kid. There's 2 of them. The end one, of course, everybody loves. Because that's like the Rocky moment, right?
Yes.
But one of the moments that I think is great is, where they show the Johnny character almost killing Danny's character, with the skeletons and
the fence,
the whole thing with the symbolism of them dressed as skeletons, and you see them going right up to the edge of almost killing someone. That sort of Grim Reaper symbolism, right? And the whole point of that is that, and this is another thing once you get into my books, you'll see is this talk about this moment of decision that you have. I remember the first time I actually was just doing judo, and to me, judo was just like a game, almost like a video game or something. You just do it, somebody taps, and everything's cool, right? I remember the first time somebody didn't tap, and it was like their arm just popped, and that was this moment where you realize this isn't a game.
Yeah.
I just broke somebody's arm, and I remember it's like this. I was like a teenager at the time, and it was like this sort of come to Jesus moment, almost like when I talk about the fighting teaches you why those other things are important.
Right.
That's like when I first realized, no, I'm really learning how to hurt people here. And that's like, that forced me to really think, what am I doing? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that moment that you see Johnny, where the other guys try to tell him to hold back and he can't. And that's where he becomes the villain, really, in that moment. And that shows both what karate is supposed to teach you. No, this is not about, you shouldn't be hurting people. That's not the point of it. You're supposed to defend yourself. And then he almost kills him. Then Mr. Miyagi jumps in and saves him. And in the process, symbolically also saves karate as an art in people's eyes.
Right.
And so that scene, there's so much contained in it as a fight scene. Not the fighting itself, but the meaning of the fighting that's contained in there. And there's just so many layers to that movie, and so much that's worth learning from it, as a martial artist.
Yeah, I'll agree. And I'll tell you, if you just mentioning that fight scene, you should, if you have time, go back and listen to my interview with Sensei Fumio Demura, who was Pat Morita's stunt double. And he talks, and he actually tells a hilarious story about that fight scene. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. I did not realize how funny Fumio Demura was, but he told, I don't want to try to tell it because I can't tell it as good as him, obviously, but it's worth a listen. It was very, very fun interview and cool hearing his insights into that, and how they offered him the role of Mr. Miyagi and he turned it down.
Yeah.
Because, he didn't think he spoke English well enough. And so we would have never had Pat Morita. I mean, I'm sure Fumio Demura would have done phenomenal too, but the two of them became best friends because of it. Yeah.
I mean, Demura was a true martial artist, yes. But when you think back to the scene that I mentioned earlier about, the anniversary of Mr. Miyagi's child and wife's death in a internment camp, it's like that really shows you like the difference a good actor makes over a good martial artist.
Yes.
So it's like, it's hard for me to imagine someone doing that scene better.
Yeah.
Or any martial artist doing that scene better than Pat Morita did as just a genuinely talented actor.
And the fact that they didn't even really want him initially because they thought he was just a comedian because he did stand-up comedy and he was in Happy Days.
Yeah.
Imagine if they would have picked someone else. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, it really is hard for me to imagine, like there being all of us. It's hard for us to imagine there being anybody else doing that.
Yeah,
but
agreed.
Definitely not the martial arts guys, because there were great martial artists at the time, but those guys weren't all as like actors like a guy like Pat Morita was.
Yeah, exactly. Before I let you go, is there anything that you want to make sure we get out there, or maybe that I forgot to ask before we wrap it up?
Well, okay. Just plug my books. Like there's
definitely,
my first book is Philosophy of Fighting, Morals and Motivations of the Modern Warrior. And the second book is The Soul of Fighting, Martial Arts, Combat Sports, and Search for Warrior Wisdom. And so those two books are all of my columns that were ever written for Black Belt. And you can get them through Amazon right now. And the other two things I was going to mention is that right now, the book I'm trying to stop writing is the Cocktogi Moon book, which is just a collection of interviews and event reports and short martial art or news shorts from that time, and also about the aftermath, where all these guys ended up now.
Right.
And that one I hope to get out this year. And the final thing is that I've started another project. The fourth book I want to write is about continuing to fight and practice martial arts, into your middle age and past that.
Nice.
Because that's something I myself continue to do, because I really think that at all stages of your life, trying to be competitive. Trying to actually get in there and risk something, even if it's a small risk, is worthwhile, and it teaches you something, and it keeps you honest in a way that other things don't. So that I want to write a book about how to do that, or how I've done it at least, and hopefully maybe inspire some other guys to either try it out themselves or to try to practice, even if they don't go and compete, to practice in ways that they'll be able to continue to do the martial arts, as opposed to just be the guy who stands on the side and teaches.
Right.
That you can actually do it yourself into your middle years and past that. So that's the fourth book.
Cool. And I will definitely put a link for your website so people can keep up to date and find out when those are coming out and everything too. So.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
But seriously, man, this has been a lot of fun, man. I truly appreciate it. And I know the time change is weird and it's not always easy to schedule these things. And I know you said you don't really do a lot of podcasts. So I truly appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I think the listeners are really going to enjoy this one.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun for me too. And I hope we can do this again sometime after I finally managed to get a couple more books out there.
Hey, just let me know. I haven't had a repeat guest yet. I've had a few ask about it, so I need to come up with a good way to do that. So I will definitely be in touch about that if we start doing that.
Okay, for sure. Sounds good. But yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.